You are listening to the Push Media Podcast Network.
This is good shit.
Can I make it damn right? I'll be on the next flight, first class, paying cash, sitting next to Vanna White now. I don't have any uranium in tow. But if you do want to take a ride with me, with about 3 women in the flow in the Doe Sea, just make sure you don't bring any uranium on the plane. Because if you bring any uranium on the plane, we're going to have a problem. And that seems to be the problem that we had over in Heathrow. And Heathrow has nothing to do with Wuthering Heights, one of the worst books ever written in the history of books. That book had nothing happen at all. It was a bunch of people living in a house, and anyone reading it, I feel for you. It's a piece of literary trash. However, Heathrow is the airport in London. And the airport in London had a bit of a problem, not but 24 hours ago. Now, about 24 hours ago, there was an issue over in Heathrow, which is the airport in London, where, how do I put this? They found uranium. Let me just repeat myself, just to be very clear. They found uranium. Now, uranium is used for bombs. Uranium is one of the most carcinogenous materials in the world. If you even touch uranium, you have cancer, your kids have cancer, and the children of your children will have cancer because it's uranium. Now, uranium was found in Heathrow, and they didn't like it. They were like, whoa, who has uranium? We need to ground flights. Now, that happened. Now, let me tell you about what happened just 12 hours ago in America. 12 hours ago in America, all flights were grounded because there was an issue with a computer. That makes sense. That makes sense, right? Because everyone knows the entire ecosystem of airplanes that fly in and out of every American airport in the country all run off of one fucking laptop. Every single plane in this country, every single airport in the United States is entirely dependent on one control room having power with one laptop. And because that one control room with the one laptop lost power, we had to ground every flight in America. Does that make sense? I don't think it necessarily does, but I'm asking. And I'm a crazy person, we all know this, but just let me connect a few dots, potentially. I'm not saying I'm right, but we all know I am. If we were to find uranium in the Heathrow airport a day ago, and all of the flights in America, 12 hours after the uranium discovery, were grounded. And when I say grounded, to be very clear, I think this is something people are getting wrong. The flights in America are not being grounded in the traditional sense. They're not being grounded in the sense, hey, you're on a plane that left New York City, headed to San Francisco. You're about over Colorado right now. We just found out we need to ground all the planes. You should just, take a minute, take a respite in Denver. No. What's actually happening is every single plane in America that has left or departed, when we say grounded, they were required to come back to their original point of departure. Now, a couple things. One, if we just lost power to the very special, almost holy laptop that controlled the ecosystem of all American planes taking flight, how did we decide we want to send everyone back to where they came from? I thought we didn't have that ability, but whatever. And by the way, we're going to have power at 9 a.m. tomorrow. That's something that's already been announced, but, don't ask too many questions. Now, if I were to connect some dots, here's what I would suggest. Here's what I humbly would submit. If we just found uranium, which is something that terrorists use for bombs in the airport in London, and then we made every single plane in the air in America come back to where they left, not where they closest were to landing, where they departed from, part of me thinks maybe we're looking for somebody. Part of me thinks maybe we're looking for the guy that brought uranium. Part of me thinks, who would be the people that have uranium? Well, it can't just be a regular Tom, Dick, or Harry walking around with uranium. It's probably not even Brittany Griner, but we did just release someone to Russia who's known as the Merchant of Death and would certainly be able to know how to move uranium. Now, again, I'm crazy. I don't mean to connect dots, but boy, it does certainly seem like we had a potential terrorist threat in London, which was thwarted successfully. But in order to figure out who is the genesis of this uranium, we said every single plane in the goddamn sky better come back to where they left from, because we need to ask everybody questions. We can't manage if every person on a plane is grounded in a different city from where they took off. We will not be able to keep track of every single person. We need to know where every single person was at every single second in the last 24 hours, because we have uranium. We got to figure out where that came from, who put it there, and why. Now, again, I don't mean to connect dots, and I'm sorry if I'm alarming anyone, but if you want to go and take a ride with me with 3 women in the tow in the dough seat, just don't bring uranium. First point of mine. Now, second point, if what I'm talking about might be a bit perturbing, might have you on edge, let's talk about something that is pretty much universally agreed upon, will have everyone relaxed, and is something that I'm sure, based on knowing me, looking at my picture, looking at the picture of my face on your phone as you listen to my words in your ears, something everyone wants me to talk about next is obviously race. So let's do it. Now, the NFL. The NFL has some issues. It has had some problems. It has had some hiccups, I guess, to put it politely. And one of the biggest ones is a story I came across this week that really made me take a step back and do some additional research, which is, I know, something not many people like to do ever at all. So luckily I did it for you. Now, the NFL has had a slew of issues and a slew of bad PR, but among them, the most recent being the payouts that it is paying to families of former NFL players from CTE or from head trauma. Now, there's been a lawsuit in Philadelphia filed against the NFL where it claimed that the NFL was paying out families of black players less money when it came to CTE lawsuits. Now, let me just repeat this. The NFL was paying families of former players who had suffered from concussive head trauma, from CTE. It was paying those players and their families less money if they were black. Now, let's not even, for a second entertain the thought that, wait, aren't most people in the NFL? Never mind, let's not even go there. But let's talk about something else. Now, this lawsuit filed against the NFL in Philadelphia claimed that the NFL was getting away with this practice of paying black players and their families less money because of a controversial practice first established and identified as race norming. Now, race norming, this was the part of the story where I was reading, I was like, wait a minute, is this like a real thing? Because race norming just, first of all, doesn't even sound like a real term. It sounds like something completely made up. It sounds like something only a true blue racist would say, like branch manager. Now, look that one up. But back to the point. So the NFL was paying players and families less money based on the practice of race norming. So I did a little bit of research, and it turns out race norming is actually real. It's actually a real thing that was first introduced by the actual federal government in the California school system in the 1970s. And it was essentially claiming that you should judge all standardized tests for African American children on a curve because they're dumber. That's it. It's the end of the definition of what race norming is. I wish I was making this up. I wish this was not real. And if it's not sitting well with you, fucking good. It shouldn't. I couldn't believe this. My mind was goddamn blown to find out that there was actually a practice that the federal government instituted, originally starting in school systems in California, starting in school systems, the very beginning of life. Starting in school systems, the federal government said, black people are dumber than white people, so take that into account when judging and scoring them. What the fuck, government? What the good flying sweet fuck are you talking about? That was a real thing. And that alone should be enough evidence for anyone who's walking around today saying racism is not a problem, racism is a thing of the past. Can you shut the fuck up about slavery? It happened so long ago. Sure, It was a while ago. You still can't own people. But also in the 1970s, we had the government say black people are not as smart. What the fuck? How is that allowed? How the flying fuck is that allowed? And thankfully, the more research I did, it turns out enough people decided that maybe this was a little fucked up, this practice of race norming. So in 1991, the practice of race norming was outlawed across all federal levels. However, and this is where it gets really, really fucking confusing, at least to me, is that the NFL seemed to miss that bit of information. They seemed to miss that news story. Because the players and the families of the players that filed the lawsuit against the NFL claimed that they were still using race norming as justification for smaller payouts. But how would that even legally be possible if the practice of race norming was outlawed in 1991? That's a suspicious question. It's almost like the NFL might be a little racist. It's almost like there might be a strain of institutional racism embedded in the NFL's fundamental structure. It's almost like having a league of 32 billionaires that think they own black people might lead to a few contentious situations. And I don't want to put all of the onus on the NFL as like, hey, the NFL is this big, evil organization that's just here to exploit people. That's not true. The NFL has a bunch of other issues. It's not just race. I mean, look at Tom Brady pictured with his son. The NFL has problems that extend far beyond the color of our skin. I mean, we have the greatest quarterback of all time really taking inappropriate pictures with his son. We have the Dolphins quarterback Tua on to his 4th concussion this year, and they still keep trying to shove him out there to play. And I hope he, recovers and doesn't end up ruining his life medically, because based on the color of his skin, the NFL is not going to be too interested in giving him or his family too much money down the road, even though they legally have no reason not to. So the NFL has some issues. It has some problems. And as the performance journalist most popular in your life, I will continue to follow this story. I'm not okay with this. I don't think it's cool that race norming is a real thing. And I don't want to sound like I'm some activist. I'm not. I'm just a guy about the news. Even though I'm not the news, I'm making all of this up. But I'm telling you this. Race norming is a fucking ugly and evil practice. It's also something that was real. It's also something that happened. And just because something is ugly, just because something sucks, just because something's bad, just because it's something you don't want to be true, does not mean it didn't happen. It is so important, it is crucial that you are able to sift apart what you want to be true versus what is true. What is true is that the federal government started in the school systems in the 70s saying black people are less than white people. Here's the science to back it up. That's true. That's evil. That's gross. But now we know about it and we can fight against it. It's the same thing that applies to the uranium found in Heathrow and the flights being grounded in America. Now, no one wants it to be true that we live in a world so goddamn dangerous that only a select few are actually aware of just how dangerous this world is. And because of that, we can't have everyone being aware of the danger level. Otherwise, everyone would be running around with their head cut off. So instead, we are going to lie to the public. Sure, we might have found uranium in Heathrow Airport, but what we're going to do is lie and say that a control room in America with one single fucking laptop lost power, so we need every plane in America to come back to where it left. Now, we're not really trying to alarm anybody, but again, we did find uranium, and anyone who got on a plane in the last 24 hours better get the fuck back to where they left from, because we have some questions. Now, it is an uncomfortable truth. It is a scary thought. It's not something you want to be true. But again, you have to sift through what is true versus what you want to be true. Because if you want ultimately the best scenarios to happen, you need to know the facts. If you don't want institutional racism to exist, you need to be aware that it does exist. And that way, you can start to dismantle systematically all of the machinations that allow that racist bullshit to perpetuate itself. Same thing applies to terrorist attacks. If we are concerned, if there are, a bunch of skirmishes happening in the world that could very, very fucking easily lead to World War III, i.e. Russia, the Ukraine, anything in the Middle East, because it's the Middle East. If we just gave back the Merchant of Death, these are all facts that should be floating around in your head that when you find out uranium was found in an airplane at an airport, maybe, just maybe, there are people that want to cause harm. Just maybe, machine failure isn't actually what's going on. And I don't want people to be worried. I don't want to be an alarmist. But I do want people to be prepared, and I do want people to know what the fuck is up, what is good, what is real. Know what is real, because we all can't be George Santos. We all cannot be George Santos. We all do not have the luxury of making up reality as we go along. Now, George Santos has probably not felt any level of concern in the last 24 hours. But you know why? Because he makes up reality. We cannot be George Santos. We are not lucky enough. There can only be one George Santos, and Highlander, obviously. I want to make sure people are aware of reality, and along the way, I want to champion those who make up reality. George Santos was sworn into Congress and threw up a white power sign. As a brown person who might be Jewish and vaguely Hispanic. That's funny, but even I have to admit, when we have uranium in airports, being funny isn't always what you want. You can't make up reality. You have to face reality in the face. You can't just put your head in the sand when you hear news you don't like. You can't just write a fake check in Brazil when you want to buy something and don't have money. You can't just make up the fact you went to an Ivy League college when you didn't. You can't just make up reality all the time. Sometimes reality is important. Sometimes what's true, as uncomfortable, as sucky as it may be, is what's true. Take Alex Jones, for example, and the Sandy Hook trial he just went through. You remember when his lawyer, his own goddamn lawyer, accidentally, air quotes, sent all of his recorded messages, texts, and phone calls to the opposite side? Well, that's true. That's reality. You might not like Alex Jones. You might think what he was doing with Sandy Hook was evil and gross and wrong. But at the same time, it's still true that his own lawyer sent all of his information to the other side. Now, that's atrocious. However, that's true. You might not like it, but it's true. And thankfully, a judge just disbarred the lawyer Alex Jones had. He just disbarred the lawyer that accidentally sent all of his messages, text messages, phone calls, and recorded conversations to the other side. You might not like it, but what's important is that that is true. And in order for the best of any case, in order for the best case scenario of anything to happen, you need to be aware of all of the facts. Because if you don't have all of the facts, you're susceptible to people making up their own facts. You become susceptible to geniuses, to leaders of men like George Santos making up reality, but you also become susceptible to people like the FBI just, storming in and telling everyone not to worry. Sure, we found uranium, but we need to ground all the planes. Don't worry, your power plant lost power, but the FBI's coming. We'll get to the bottom of this. You need to be aware of the worst case and the best case scenario. Your facts don't care how you feel. They really don't. Not to quote Ben Shapiro, because my God, why would I ever want to do that? But facts don't care about your feelings. What is true is we had uranium in an airport, and then we had every other plane in the sky have to go back to where it left from. I don't want to connect dots that aren't there, but if I was someone who wanted to figure out, hey, where did this uranium come from? This might be how I go about figuring that out. And if I were to take steps even further to sound even crazier, well, who would be the type of people that are able to successfully move and transport uranium? Because that's not easy to do. You can't just take a clump of uranium and put it in your pocket. You don't just get a clump of coal and uranium for Christmas, because that's how you and several generations get cancer. The only people that can successfully move uranium through, major public places are people who specialize in it, are people who are, professionally known for it, are people who might even have nicknames like the Merchant of Death, are people who might even been released from prison recently for a WNBA player. And what I can tell you for an absolute fact, without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, with absolute and utter certainty, is that I am confident that Brittany Griner, the center for the Phoenix Mercury, is probably not the person who brought uranium to the airport. But, I could be wrong.